And welcome, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Kelly Choi. I'm the Director of Grants and Community Partnerships for ArtsFairfax. And here with me today is...
Hi, I'm Nicole Pallison. I'm the grants manager here at ArtsFairfax.
We are excited to be able to tell you about the project support grant opportunity that is currently open for FY26. So we're going to walk you through what you should know about this grant and the process today. As we do that, we'll highlight things that are new and different, as well as just things that are important for anyone to know. When we're talking today, I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. When we're talking today, we're going to give you an overview of the whole grant program itself. We will touch on how the process of submitting your application works and what that looks like in our submission software. We will also touch on the things that you should really know as you consider whether you should apply for this grant, including whether or not you're eligible. And then we'll have pauses throughout the conversation for Q&A. You can also put your questions in the chat as we're going along. Depending on what that question is and when we are going to answer it, we might stop or we might hold that for later in the conversation. I do also want to mention, as we get started, for everybody who is new to ArtsFairfax, who has just discovered this grant, I will get further into this detail later, but this grant is specifically for nonprofit or arts organizations applying with a fiscal sponsor. It is not for individual artists. It is also specifically for organizations that are based in Fairfax County, the city of Fairfax, or the city of Falls Church. If you're outside of that area, you're not eligible for this program. So just wanted to say that ahead of time before we get too far into the conversation. We will talk through all the pieces of that as we continue the conversation today as well. All right. So just a heads up, we always like to start this conversation by sharing a little bit about who we are. ArtsFairfax is the designated local arts agency for Fairfax County. We have a wonderful staff of 10 people. We are very active in the Fairfax County area, engaging with arts organizations and artists through a variety of programming that we and our partners offer. So we're happy to see you out in the community, and we hope that you'll continue to engage with us. As we work through the new website today, which we'll talk a lot about, Allison and Stella, who are up here, are the kind of the masterminds behind that effort. So big shout out to them and their work. So just to give you a quick overview and to think a little bit more about what it is ArtsFairfax does. You're all here for a grant opportunity, and you know that that fits into our funding capacity. Alongside that, we also advocate at the county and state level for additional funding for our programs and other arts programs. We try to provide resources for our grantees and artists and even other organizations who are not yet grantees to successfully operate in this local area. We also, in our own work, promote arts events and arts organizations through our website, on our events calendar, and our arts directory. There's also a resource on there to find works of public art that exist in Fairfax County. Beyond that, we provide professional learning opportunities for arts administrators and artists. We also curate artist calls and job opportunities in the arts on our website. So as you're going through your work, don't forget that you have all those resources for ArtsFairfax as well. All right, moving on. I'm going to turn it to Nicole.
Thanks, Kelly. Just wanted to describe how the project support grant, what we're going to talk about here today, fits into our overall grant programs here at ArtsFairfax. We distribute more than $750,000 in county funds through a competitive grant series, and we'll do that throughout fiscal year 26. There are 3 grant opportunities for each fiscal year. Operating support, which is sort of like keep the lights on money for day-to-day operations. That grant has now closed for fiscal year 26 and is currently in its review process. We also offer a ticket and participation subsidy grant. Currently, it's closed for fiscal year 25, but for fiscal 26, it's going to be opening up again in August. This is a program that's meant to help you offer free or discounted tickets or assist with transportation to your programming for underserved members of the community who might otherwise be unable to attend. But the subject of today's session and why you're all here is the Project Support Grant. This is a grant that's going to help supporting you trying new things like expanding programming, launching a new project that reaches a new audience, or collaborating with a new artistic or other partner. And I'm going to take you through some of the website that is going to show off not only our new website, but also the Project Support Grant. This website's been reorganized in a way that hopefully will break down a lot of the grant information into logical steps that will take you through the process. So in a moment, let me take over screen sharing from Kelly. And now you should be able to see the ArtsFairfax website. Kelly, can you give me a thumbs up if that's showing up correctly? All right, thank you. So this is our brand new website. Here we're starting on the project support grant page, which you can see is here just project-support-grants. Right now I want to highlight some of the grant program objectives. This project support grant is going to help provide financial means, but also connections to support established and emerging arts organizations. Again, just wanted to reemphasize that this is a project for nonprofit arts organizations or arts organizations who are applying with a 501c3 or a fiscal sponsor. This grant is also going to help you promote opportunities to create new art, to expand the offerings that you offer, to use the funds also to generate other support for these projects. We don't require a one-to-one match for the project support, but hopefully it helps you go out there and leverage all different sorts of streams of funding. One of the things I wanted to highlight too is that project support is different from operating support in its goals. It's supposed to help you engage new audiences or to program activities that wouldn't normally be part of your usual programming. Maybe you're trying to pilot a new class, or partner with a new collaborator that might typically be financially out of reach. But such lovely quotes and photos. Thanks again to Allison and Stella, who helped us design this new part of the website. But this is where the magic happens. Here in these tabs on the project support grant information and resources. Each of these grant pages actually is sort of laid out similar to this. So hopefully this logical flow will make sense as we talk through it. You start here on this dates and deadlines tab. This is a high-level timeline, and we'll cover a lot of the steps about the application and all the different parts of the review in detail a little later in this presentation. Let's see here. Part of this includes staff review of eligibility and completeness. So once you submit your application by the deadline of July 15th at 7 p.m., we'll review your applications for completeness initially and then pass them along to a panel. The ultimate scoring of the applications all comes down to a group of expert panelists who know the arts and know things about Fairfax County. That's a panel review that takes place in late August. That's something that's open for you to be able to view. It's live streamed so that you're able to view it online and listen to your application be reviewed. And then the notification of the award for the fiscal year 26 project support grants will happen in October of 2025. The next tab we have over here is our information session tab. So when you click on this,
Can I jump in for 1 second before we go
please
on?
do.
And my internet cut out for just a minute. So I do want to highlight maybe the most important piece on this page is, of course, the grant deadline. So just a reminder, we'll say it a lot, July 15th at 7 p.m. And yes, the 7 p.m. time is specific and deliberate. That is when Submittable's tech support cuts off for the night. So if something were to go wrong later in the evening, it would be difficult or impossible to address it with them. We're available right up until that moment to help you and answer questions too. But please don't forget, July 15th at 7 p.m., we don't accept anything that comes in late.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. the 7 p.m. deadline, we are available up until that time on the day the application is due. But that 7 p.m. is because if anything's going weird with Submittable, they're available to help us with it. So yes, where was I? Oh, all right. Dates and deadlines. So now we're having a look at information session. That's where we are right now. So obviously, you knew that it was today. We did it. So eventually what you'll see here is this is last year's information session video, but this video that we're recording right now will be posted here along with the slides that we're going to be showing you throughout this presentation. And guidelines and eligibility is always the best place to start when you're looking at each of these grant programs that we offer. Your organization's eligibility is determined here in the guidelines. If you want to jump right to that, if you click on this link on the website, the eligibility criteria and funding restrictions, that takes you straight to the grant guidelines for this project support grant and jumps you right to the page that describes your organizational eligibility. So you can see it's several criteria, some of which have sub-criteria to determine things. So this is where the operating in Fairfax County element comes into play as well. There are lots of different ways that we can describe or define your organization's activity to determine whether or not you're operating primarily in Fairfax County or serving a primarily Fairfax County audience with the project support grant. I'm gonna step back to our guidelines and eligibility tab. Some of this information is broken down here on this tab, but a lot of it is available in the grant guidelines. You can download a copy of this PDF from that eligibility and criteria link. This general link will also take you right to the front page if you want to read more about the grant program. Got that deadline right on the cover. So again, please do note that. And then you can see the table of contents breaks down the grant guidelines, more or less in the steps of the application that you follow, as well as including some preparation assistance tips, some feedback that we've had from panelists who review these applications about what makes a strong application. So that's important to review. If you click on this little arrow that's going into a little box, that you could download a PDF copy of this for your own records. So that's always a good thing to do.
I think I'm going to jump back. Oh, are you finished
Go
with
ahead.
this? I'll jump in with the fiscal sponsor.
Almost done. I was going to just quickly describe the grant categories.
Perfect.
There are 4 grant categories within the project support grant. We ask you to choose the one that you think best fits your organization. Some of them are further described in the project support grant guidelines, but these categories include arts and education, an opportunity grant, a partnership grant, and an arts access grant. Oftentimes, you might think, oh, well, this project could fit in one category or the other. Just do your best to determine the best fit. There are questions in the application that depend on what your grant category is. For example, if you select arts and education, you'll be asked about, educational partnerships or outcomes. Whereas an arts access grant, you'll be asked about how you're reaching underserved audiences. So the subcategory that you choose does determine some of the questions that you'll be asked in the application itself. There's not a specific amount of funding or quota for any one category, so just choose the one that fits your work the best. Kelly, you can go ahead and jump into fiscal sponsors if you like. It's something we've mentioned a few times when it comes to eligibility, so it's worth looking into.
Yeah, of course. So just kind of expanding on the eligibility that Nicole has already talked about. Of course, anyone who has a 501c3 nonprofit status is eligible that's part of the eligibility to apply. You can also apply if you are an organization who maybe has not yet received that 501c3 status, but you are working with a fiscal sponsor. So this is also outlined in the guidelines that we were looking at on that page just a minute ago. But we wanted to highlight a couple of pieces. So if there is an organization who is considering applying with a fiscal sponsor, you must, before you even submit, you must reach out to ArtsFairfax and kind of give us an idea of what's going on. We'll probably have follow-up questions for you. You can start just by saying, hey, I want to apply with a fiscal sponsor, and then we'll sort of take it away from there. But essentially, we'll need to connect with your fiscal sponsor ahead of your application submission. And then throughout that process, the fiscal sponsor will need to provide some information, and you as an organization will need to provide some information. The other key thing with fiscal sponsorship is that the organization is the applicant. It is not the fiscal sponsor who is the applicant, if that makes sense. So if you're in that boat, it's kind of a nuanced conversation. Please reach out to us and talk to us. We can help you navigate the process. I strongly suggest that you reach out earlier rather than later. I hate for people to do work and then find out they went down the wrong path. So we're here. We answer lots of questions. Please let us know if that's something that you're considering for your application. All right, so we are going to move off this slide for grant restrictions and eligibility. So we're gonna go back to the website. And the reason we keep going back to the website, which is wonderful, is because these are all the pieces that we want you to find when you're submitting your own application. So we will get here as soon as I lost my mouse again. Oh, Nicole's got it up. Thank you. So there are some restrictions to the program, of course. The activity that you're presenting first and foremost must take place in Fairfax County, the city of Fairfax, or the city of Falls Church. You have to demonstrate that you have quality and qualified and professional can mean volunteer or paid staff that are capable of supporting the project that you're proposing. And then it must occur in our grant year, which is July 1 of 2025 to June 30th of 2026. There's a small caveat to that you can actually request a 2-year cycle if the type of project that you're proposing really dictates a need for that. Sometimes that comes up if you're working in the school system, because if we're not going to tell you that you get this project until October, but you needed to start before the school year began, that might be a scenario where that is the case. There are also category items you cannot use for the project support grant program. Largely, they're the same as our operating support exclusions. You can't use it for your own organization's fundraising, construction or renovation, political advocacy, activities that aren't open to the general public, which if you're an arts education and you're working in a public school, that's considered open to the general public. Cannot use it to support debt retirement, pre-grant costs, any type of proselytizing or faith-based activity, or re-granting. And then note that if we've had a applicant with like a scholarship program, and that is one that is sometimes considered re-granting, sometimes not. It might depend on what that project looks like. So please, again, take a look at those when you're thinking of applying, and if you have questions, sooner rather than later, and we can help you through the decision. All right. I think that's all for our grant restrictions. So I will go back to our recent updates, Nicole. So we do have a couple of updates to the program if you're a returning submitter. One we've already mentioned several times, and then several more times if you were listening to the panel last week. So you know that we do have a new website that we're very excited about. Additionally, this year we are collecting ACH information from all of our grantees. So we will be doing ACH transfers instead of paper checks. We're very excited about that. You'll provide that information in your organization profile if you already submitted that for your operating support application. That's great. We've got it. We're good to go. We are returning to a upload for the project activities table. In past years, we had been manually inputting information into Submittable directly. We did hear from you that was a little tedious and it didn't copy paste very well. So we did go back to a manual upload like the finances document. So you'll find a blank copy of what you need on our website, complete that, and then be able to upload it. We did adjust the award cap for the grant this year. It had previously been $30,000. The cap is now $25,000 for this year. And then the last big update is that you can edit last year's submission of your organization profile. In the past, we had you fill out one every year. You can now make edits to that. We have put together some directions on our website, some instructions on that resource tab, I believe, or applicant resources on that tab for how to get back into Submittable and find that document and ask for it to be reopened and updated. It's a little bit clunky because you can also create a new one. So sometimes we've had a couple applicants who accidentally or unintentionally created multiple copies of the organization profile. So then it sort of becomes difficult to find which one was your final one. So just proceed with some caution there. But you can reopen last year's. You will have to update some specific questions in there. And you will have to upload some documents again, but most of the narrative should remain in last year's profile. And then you would just need to update that as it is relevant to your organization. If you submitted for operating support this year, you only need to update that profile if there's a change, right? So if you just submitted, you may be able to use the exact same profile, and hopefully that also saves some time. All right. I think for this moment, before we go back to start looking at the application itself, we did want to take a second to pause and just see if there's any questions from the group. If you want, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask or put something in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with. Stephen's question is, can a church be a fiscal sponsor? I would have to double check, and it might depend on their specific nonprofit status. I'd have to dig into that a little bit further. So the answer right now is I'm not sure, but we can find out. Any other questions for the moment? All right. And Nicole, if you have a question that is relevant to the group you want to bring up for eligibility, or we can talk individually if it's a more individual question.
It's more of an individual question. I think I've got it, but I could touch base with you after.
Great. Awesome. All right. Okay, so we're going to go back to the website and start talking about the application. So we'll kind of work through where you can find resources that you might need while you're putting together the application, and then we'll actually take a look at it in Submittable. So let me get back to that screen. All right. Too many Zoom windows here. Okay. How's the text size? Are we good? Not too small. Please stop me if it's too small. All right. So Nicole brought us through the first part of this table that gives you kind of some ahead of the application information. We talked about the major timeline, this where you can find this information and the eligibility before you even think if you should apply. But then as we continue across the tabs here, you'll be able to find first a link that will take you to the application. We'll follow that in a moment. And more information about the documentation that you are going to need to compile yourself. So first piece I want to highlight is that you can download a Word copy of the application. Submittable is not super friendly, as like you can't print something directly from Submittable and make it look happy. It looks kind of messy. So we created a Word copy so that you could work as a group offline. If your organization has a shared drive and you're dividing the application, download the application here. I mentioned earlier, there are those two tables that you'll be asked to complete. One is the project schedule, which outlines a timeline of the work in this project. And then the other is the financials. So this is where you'll find these two pieces right here. And there are links in the application that will guide you back to this page as well. And then lastly, this list, the bulleted list at the bottom of the page, these are all the external documents that you as an organization would have to gather to submit along with your application. So this is just a bulleted list of things that you'll have to find for yourself, right? Or create for yourself. Again, that's not like there's all specific upload places in the application or the organization profile, but this is a list of what you could put together independently. All right, and then as we move on, the next tab, we do have a couple of other pieces for you to consider as you're completing the application. We did collate sort of a list of applicant or grantees from last year's project support grant. That can kind of give you an idea of, who's been involved in this type of work before. We have compiled some sample application answers that organizations who have scored well or been well received by the panel have highlighted, so you can see how others have addressed the similar questions to what you're being asked this year. And then there is a short online submittable, kind of like instructions for how to get around submittable, as well as this is the piece I mentioned a moment ago, instructions for how to update or request that you update your organization profile. So that said, I want to just take us back to the application tab for a moment. And as we mentioned, that you can get a link right here to submit the application. You may also have this artsfairfax.submittable.com bookmarked on your own computer because all of our stuff is housed here. So when you come to our submittable site, which we've now actually navigated off the ArtsFairfax webpage, you can find all the applications that we currently hold open. So you'll actually need to submit to, some of these are showing as they're not open because it's on my side. You'll actually need to submit 2 applications in order to submit for this grant. So the first one is the organization profile for grant applicants. You must complete that form, but that is only a portion of the application. You must also complete the project support grant application. So when you come to this webpage, you can see more specifics about the grant guidelines and where to find them and what you need to consider, the same things that you're hearing us talk about today. All these links will get you back to that information. When you're ready to begin your application, you're simply going to start the process on Submittable. It is going to prompt you to log in. I already did that for the sake of time today. This first question you're going to get is new this year as well. This is a way that Submittable is helping us organize arts organizations kind of on the back end. So if you have ever submitted, let's say, I'll just randomly say, like, if you're the Fairfax Ballet and one year you name your application Fairfax Ballet and the next year you name it the Fairfax Ballet, this is a way that we don't have to think of those as 2 separate organizations. We're combining them. Either way, you can put an EIN or a UEI in here, and Submittable is going to find your organization info. You can also skip this step. Nicole and I can add it after the fact, so I'm going to skip this today. The first thing that you'll be prompted with in Submittable is the eligibility questions. So please do take the time to read and review these before you go to the application, especially if you are a new organization. If you're simply clicking yes or no to get through this quiz, then unfortunately we do sometimes find out later that if one of these is wrong, you're not eligible. If you have questions about what exactly they mean, please call Nicole and I. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly for the sake of our conversation, but you will be asked to provide support that you have an address within Fairfax County, City of Fairfax and Falls Church, that your mission is in the creation or several other points of the arts. You have the current 501c3, or there's an option for applying with a fiscal sponsor. There's also several requirements about how frequently you're providing work and just some basic compliance questions that we ask for. You are not receiving direct funding from Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then this piece here, just kind of take note of the bottom section of these eligibility. There's 3 ways that you can meet this particular eligibility question. All right. And then we'll move on. Once you submit the eligibility, you get into the grant application itself. So I do want to remind you that you can, this section here will be at the top of the page the whole time. You can get back to the grant guidelines, which also has the eligibility information and the evaluation criteria in it as well. First thing that everyone will be asked is, are you applying with a fiscal sponsor? Remember, that's only for organizations who do not have a 501c3 status. If you answer this incorrectly, you're going to end up with questions that you don't need and probably won't make sense. So just double check that you're going to give the right answer there. I'm going to say no for the sake of our demonstration. As you move through the application, a lot of this information is simple and relatively easy to just respond to at the beginning. We did kind of highlight some of the evaluation criteria as we go into the application itself. When you get to this sort of first upload, this is where we're talking about that organization profile in Submittable. That's the other form where, again, you can either update last year's form or just go in and create a new one. If you've already submitted for operating support in FY26 and you updated your organization profile then, and there's been no changes, you can use that same submission here. Again, right below this download spot, and you'll see this in a lot of places throughout the application, there are additional instructions for what you should consider for this particular question. So there's more information here. If there's a piece of this download and edit that you're not as familiar with. And again, Nicole and I can always help out as well. All right, so going into the primary questions of the application, we did include the full descriptions. Nicole hit on this earlier of the 4 categories that are open to project support. Sometimes you're going to see that your project fits into more than one category, but you do have to select one. And please note that once you make that selection here, it does change how the 3rd question appears in this application. So if you choose something towards the beginning and then you go back and you think, well, actually it's this other opportunity, it's going to change the question it's asking. You're going to lose an answer if you've put it in. All right, most of the rest of the application is relatively straightforward and probably familiar, particularly if you have filled this out before. The one thing we have repetitively found in Submittable is that you must manually save and save frequently. If you are going to open this application and work on it for a couple hours and then go to lunch or run errands and then come back to it, don't leave it on your screen. Save it, close it. We have a lot of issues with people who maybe like walk away, and when the internet disconnects, like some of their information is lost or doesn't save. In the application, you're also going to have the ability to add a collaborator, so someone else on your team who could help with the application, who could also log in. If you add that collaborator, please be aware that you could actually overwrite each other's edits. It doesn't seem to have the capacity to allow multiple people to edit at the same moment. So you can add a collaborator, but you're going to need to coordinate with them and make sure you're not accidentally changing each other's work as well. This section here, the project table, that's what we were looking at on the website a minute ago. Again, there's a link below of how to get back there and download that project table. Make sure that all the required cells are filled out as best as you can. Nearly all of our questions do not have an enforced word count. You see a suggested word count on the application. So that it's not enforced, but it is suggested. So think of that as you're writing your narrative. The one question that we did update this year to have an enforced word count is in the organization profile, and it's the mission statement. And so there is now an enforced word count on that question. Let's see, lastly here, budget table and budget narrative. So again, you'll find the budget table on our website, and this link will take you back there. There's some tips down here. Be sure to read what's sort of requested of this table and how best to approach it. As we get into the narrative, same thing. More info is always better in the budget narrative. That's certainly the theme of our review last week. And then lastly, you'll get into a couple of organizational financial uploads. One note about the treasurer's report and audit. An audit is required right now if your organization has expenses over $750,000 in your most recently completed fiscal year. If you fall into that category, if you're right at that line where maybe this is the first year you need an audit or you're maybe not sure, please talk to Nicole and I, because there is a little bit of wiggle room on the timing of how that works out. All right, so lastly, work samples and supplemental materials. Again, we have recommendations for what should be included in this particular section. There's a whole wide variety of how you can get these to us. Some people do upload a whole movie file. Some people are sharing on a link that's housed, in a Google Drive or Dropbox folder. Those are all fine, whatever works best for your organization. If you're sharing a link, though, you must make sure that it is publicly viewable, does not require a login, and that it works. All right. As you come to the end, you are asked to provide sort of like a signatory page for several people within your organization. And then you must agree to the terms of use. When you view this section, you'll again find information that is included in the grants guidelines. So just be aware that that is part of this final submission. This is the manual button for saving draft. So again, I strongly encourage you to come there frequently when you're working within Submittable, especially if you're going to walk away from your computer and you think it might go to sleep. That's when we tend to unfortunately lose some of the information we had. I'm not going to submit right now because I didn't fill everything out when we were talking, but that is an overview of what Submittable looks like. All right. So I'm seeing some questions and I'm gonna take a look. I think I'm gonna hold that question just until we get closer to the end, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Good question. All right, so one thing we kind of did hit on in the Submittable application briefly was the evaluation criteria. So heading back to the website real quick. I'm going to share my screen one more time. All right, we can see right now it's organizational eligibility, right? Yes. Okay. So as you take a minute with these guidelines, because they are long, and that's why we reorganized the website to try and break them down a little bit. But further in the guidelines, we come to the evaluation criteria. I'm not going to read through all of them at this moment, but you should know there's 8 criteria for this grant program, which is a little different than our operating support. So our core criteria are worth 6 points each. And that includes the quality of programs, the feasibility of the project, community engagement, and then there's like a category specific. That was that part where, a different question is going to pop up based on which category you chose. And then the budget feasibility. So again, each of those categories is worth 6 points each. And then there are 3 additional priority elements worth 1 point each in the review. So diversity, creative placemaking, and innovation. We are not really able to include this full list of criteria in the application itself, though we did highlight the primary categories. But I would encourage you to come back to this spot in the guidelines when you're writing your answers to keep in mind the evaluation criteria itself. All right, I think we had another moment here to just pause and ask questions. And now maybe is a good moment to answer this one. So if you received a grant from last year, are we eligible for the same program this year? So kind of. First off, if you received a grant last year in general, yes, you're eligible again this year. There, you don't have to avoid applying. So if you are a program that is returning, basically, we ask that that something about the program has expanded or changed, or we're going to ask like what's new and different about this particular program. In general, if you were doing exactly the same thing, that's not really what the project support grant is for. So that's the piece for anybody who's thinking about returning. What's new or different about the program? Oh, Stephen has a good question. Are applications from year to year read cumulatively in a review session, or is the application for FY26 the only application read for an org? Yes, it is the only one read for an org. FY26 is independent of FY26. That brings us to another good point, which will come up again later, honestly. When you're writing this application, the panel can only take into consideration what is included in your application. They cannot take any outside knowledge they have of your organization into consideration. So we'll talk when we get to the grant writing tips about how to best approach that. But that kind of speaks to Stephen's question as well. All right. I think now I will pass it back to Nicole to do, yes, thanks for sharing the website. I will pass it back to Nicole to do more about the award process after the submission happens.
Speaking of sharing the website, we're back on the new website. So what I just mentioned is that yes, on this information session tab, this is where this will be updated probably in about a week or so with the full recording and some of the slides that we're sharing with you today. But right now, want to draw your attention to, as you can see, we're moving through time. Information session, guidelines and eligibility, and stepping through the application. So what happens after, say it with me now, July 15th at 7 p.m. when your application has been submitted? That would be here the award evaluation and grant process. So once you submit your application, the initial thing that happens is a staff review. We have the staff members check the applications for completeness and eligibility. So we're looking to confirm you have 501c3 status or you're applying with the appropriate fiscal sponsor information. We're looking to confirm that you are doing the majority of your work in Fairfax County, all those things that fall into that eligibility page or the eligibility description criteria in the grant guidelines. If we notice something's wrong, maybe some piece of information was the wrong file. It was labeled 990, but it was actually what you filed for the extension for the 990. We still need the actual document. We may reach out to you for additional information. But if for any reason this application is ineligible or incomplete, at that point it is rejected at the staff review level, and we will let you know if that is happening to that application. Once we determine that the applications are complete, we pass them off to a panel review. Panelists are professionals in the arts who have relevant knowledge and expertise. Perhaps they work in arts development. They may be the executive directors of companies that are adjacent to Fairfax or things like that. So people who know what the nonprofit arts scene is like and have administrative grant writing or development experience to evaluate the whole project for its artistic, organizational, and financial stability. If that sounds like somebody you know, you should send them our way. We're always looking for panelists. So Kelly, you look like you want to jump in. Oh, okay. You just engage listening. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. I know I'm moving through the process a little quickly. At that point, the panelists will review and score the applications, and then they get together in a panel meeting. So they're going to come together in person here in our office, but we're going to live stream that. So you have the opportunity to review and listen to both your project application and others. If you are listening to the panel review and you notice something is incorrect, for example, we just did this last week. Someone mentioned that an organization was having its 50th anniversary year, and it was actually their 60th. They wrote in and said, hey, could you correct that and make sure that you get a right anniversary year? So that was the sort of thing that someone who was listening was able to submit a correction for. It was sort of like a factual error in the application. So it's always worth listening to. But it's also good discussion about the merits of your application, things that panelists find to be strong or effective, or those moments when they're like, oh, I wish I had more information about inevitably the financial narrative, something like that. So staff don't play a role in that part of the evaluation, the scoring, or the discussion of the applications at that point. So anything that you might tell Kelly or I as you're working on completing the application, or questions that are answered, or things that happen in discussions between us, has to go in the application. And this sort of speaks to Stephen's question as well. The panelists are only evaluating what is in that FY26 project application. They're not looking at your operating support grant application if you submitted one. They're not looking at previous year's project support grant application. So you've got to tell the whole story in this fiscal year's application. Then, once the panelists have done all their work, Kelly and I get back to work. We wrangle an unholy spreadsheet and turn it into a funding scenario. This is basically how we determine grant amounts. They're determined by average panel scores and combined into something that's called a Z-score. And that allows us to balance lots of different kinds of applications across different panelists and the different days and panels that will evaluate them. One thing that's important to know is that the award is likely to be less than 100% of the request. So if you are doing the math in the budget and turn out and ask for $20,000, the award, even if you write an excellent application, because of the demand of the award, the way the scoring works, you're likely to receive less than 100% of that. So diversity in funding is an important positive aspect of your application, even though a one-to-one match is not required. That's also part of why we ask the question in your application, how would or could you adapt this if the project is not fully funded? And again, a reminder too that the adjustment to the award cap this year, the award cap is now $25,000 for the whole project. If you want to see the evaluation criteria, again, we've got a link on this awards process page that jumps you straight to the relevant page of the grants guidelines here. I think this is what Kelly just showed you, this evaluation criteria. Again, we can't fit all of it into the application. This is something that's really useful to have open as maybe you're having somebody read the application or you're checking it yourself. Have you addressed all the different points of this core criteria and the priority elements? Okay, I think that's what I've got on this tab, but I just moved something weird on my screen, so now I have to go find what I wanted to look at next. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and drop it in the chat and I will see if I can address it. Also, okay, I've got a couple coming in.
We have a couple like bigger questions about more specific projects I think we could talk about as we finish.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and we're gonna have plenty of time for Q&A. So yeah, these are all really
Yeah.
good questions that I think I could answer at the end once I finish explaining whatever I was going to do. Where am I?
Do you
Oh,
want
all right. One of the
to?
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going. You go ahead.
I found my spot. I have so many windows open. This is dizzying. I'm back here on this evaluation criteria. I'm gonna make it a little bigger. Again, just returning to the grants guidelines is a really excellent resource that you've got. The terms and conditions of the grant, this is what Kelly showed you. This is what you're agreeing to when you submit the application and then eventually hopefully receive an award. One thing I wanted to show you here, grant preparation assistance. So you're in the first part of that right now. That is our information session, but there's also a selection of grant writing tips at the end of this application. Just some things to keep in mind. Be writing clearly and concisely. Especially don't use jargon and always spell out acronyms. Assume that the panelist that's reading your application, they might be an artistic expert, but perhaps their strength is visual art. So if you begin using a lot of industry specific terms or acronyms that are common parlance in, say, the dance world, it's worth it to take the time to make sure you completely spell those out. So I'm just trying to think of other things that really stand out about this. Saving the application often absolutely is so important. And making sure also checking financial information against the narrative and also what's said in the application's other questions itself. The financial element of the project and operating support grants I find is often lopped off and handed off to the organization's treasurer and someone says, hey, fill this out. And so sometimes the treasurer doesn't understand how the information that they're plugging into these charts fits the whole application. And sometimes the person who's trying to explain it doesn't fully understand the numbers. So try to make sure that those things are in careful agreement. And that really goes for any part of the application where you're working with collaborators. Just reading through thoroughly and make sure people aren't repeating themselves, and that all the different narrative responses are in agreement with each other. Yeah. Oh, one other thing I wanted to point out on the website. Sorry, move these around a little bit. I'm still also learning the new website a little bit myself here. One thing that is often very powerful is the use of demographic data, especially if you're in one of the applications like the Arts Access, you're trying to identify your target population, whether that's based on location or need or something like that. Information about demographic and other county data can be found on our website. You go up to the top bar here by the ArtsFairfax logo, mouse over to resources, and then select professional development. Let me see here. Under this resources county information tab, you can find some information about Fairfax County's demographics, FCPS Title I schools, and other information that might be able to help provide you data that helps you effectively tell your story in the application itself. Okay, I think that's it on the website. Kelly, can we jump back into the presentation? I think there's a couple of things that are outlined in there to touch on.
There are. Let me take over the screen share then.
Thank you.
Alrighty. That should do it.
Oh, thank you. So,
I think on the second page, I flipped ahead of one, I think. Let me go back to the first page. There we go.
This one I actually wound up doing through the guidelines because I wanted to reinforce using the guidelines, which I think are important.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm not sure these are in the guidelines. That was more of the grant. Well, I guess
that
it
was
is
the
kind of a
general grant
mismatch.
guidelines.
Yeah.
Oh, some of this
Um,
comes from our panelists as well.
yeah, it's kind of a mishmash of things. You're right. But we did the terms and conditions too.
Okay.
You want to start here?
Yes, I will do that as well.
Perfect.
So if you receive grant funding during the period of that funded project, so anytime, if it's a class, you might need, oh, sorry, I keep saying question 7. If you're doing like a class, your materials might need to have an acknowledgement, or if you're doing a performance that's related to the project, you're expected to acknowledge Arts Fairfax's support in some of the following ways. So you might use written, such as print or digital materials, using the logo or the written acknowledgement that's on our communications kit. It might be appropriate to include an Arts Fairfax ad as well, depending on the level of the support you receive. We also encourage you to tag Arts Fairfax with the hashtag or the @ symbol, especially on Facebook and Instagram, because if you share your posts with us, we can reshare it on our social media networks as well. Um, it's a good to add the Arts Fairfax calendar link to your website and make sure that your events that are open to the public are listed in the Arts Fairfax events calendar so that other people can find them. But if you need more information about that, if you do successfully receive a project support grant, we'll also send you the grants communication kit, but you can preview that on our website as well. Um, so this is pretty much addressing what happens around October when you would hear about the results of the funding. So that's when you would receive information about acknowledging the grant, but also an opportunity to appeal. So within 30 days of receiving the notification of the grant, especially if your grant was denied and you believe that that was because of criteria other than what were set forth in the guidelines, that the panel in some way failed to apply the guidelines appropriately, or to consider all the evidence that was provided in the application, or there was an undisclosed conflict of interest in the evaluation of your application by the panel. You do have the opportunity to appeal, and that process is outlined in our grant guidelines for the project support grant. And again, just to come back to this timeline, this is what you can see on the dates and information tab that you jump to right when you open the project support grant webpage. But just reiterating, that 7 p.m. deadline is a hard and fast deadline. And there are no exceptions unless, I don't know, a tree comes down on the Submittable data center and the entire website is down for everyone. This is one of those things we encourage you start early. There's really no such thing as beginning too early. Use that save button judiciously and work on this a little bit at a time so that if you run into any issues, Submittable doesn't like your video format and you need to convert it into a different format. Internet is slow that day. You don't want to necessarily be at the whim of these sort of like random issues that can make a pressing deadline even pressier than it needs to be. So just do be aware of that deadline and build yourself plenty of time to work through all the parts of the application, especially if you're having other people submit parts of the application or you're expecting others to read and review it for completeness and correctness. There is also, like our other grants, a final report for the project support, and that's due on August 1st, the year following this sort of fiscal year of the grant. So you get the time to complete the entire project because unless the project has a 2-year timeline, it needs to be completed within fiscal year 26, which is July to June, 2025 to 2026. Our report is not like the VCA's report for operating support or project support. It's just one report. The narrative about the project activities and the financials are not split into 2 separate parts. So just the one report to complete on August 1st, at which point you'll receive the final portion of the payment. Is split into 70% and 30% payments of the grant award as it's announced in October. Okay, I think that's it. And that gives us, this is an hour, which gives us plenty of time to respond to some of these more specific questions that I think could also illuminate parts of the application process. So.
I want to jump in with one more thing I
Oh,
don't think
please
we
do.
hit on when we talk about the funding scenario or when we make that award. So after the panel meets, reviews, and scores, and then after Nicole and I put everything into a funding scenario, which is very formulaic It is not something where, like I've had some applicants think like, I'll be nice and ask for less money. Don't do that. Ask what you need to
Ask for your
ask for. Like,
maximum,
you
yeah.
can't take into account how nice and lovely you are. Um, but once we get that funding scenario established in this grant program, project support specifically, it is not our practice to award some funds to every applicant. We usually only award about half of the applicants any funding at all. And as Nicole mentioned, it's usually not the full award. There's usually some percentage of it. But there is a chance that you would get no funding when you apply to this application. So again, something to consider as you are determining whether or not you should apply for the grant.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a difference between the operating support grant where most eligible organizations will receive at least a minimum award. That's not the case for project support. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah. So we do have a lot of questions, which is great.
Mhm.
And feel free to add more as you go along. Let's see.
Okay. The first one that we didn't address was the question about, oh, wait, no, we did talk about if you applied last year with a similar program, needing to demonstrate growth, change, expansion of the project, something to that effect.
Mhm.
Okay, so what's next? Wade had a question about what constitutes an opportunity. This would be, I guess, a great time to jump to the guidelines and the description of the different subcategories
Yes,
of grant.
that is
I'll pull that
definitely
up.
a great place to look. I mean, Wade and everyone, it is a little bit vague because we have a lot of different types of organizations that present and program and exhibit in many, many different ways. And if you've got that full description up, I think what it highlights is an opportunity is something that is atypical or out of the ordinary for your organization. So if it's the same concert you do every year, I'm not sure that's an opportunity. If you have an opportunity to bring in well, that example is kind of more of an artist partnership. But if you have an opportunity to have a guest choreographer or something to that effect, or perhaps, I mean, it's something out of the ordinary that you wouldn't be able to do within your regular programming. That's the primary defining piece. Your second question about, or other two questions about improving infrastructure or revising a website, those two are maybe. I'm hesitant to give a firm yes or no to anyone most of the time because I usually don't have enough information uh, in a two-sentence chat. But what I would really strongly encourage you and anyone to do when you're thinking of something like that is look at that evaluation criteria. Because I'm not sure that upgrading a website is going to be evaluated as a thoughtful arts project. There's that piece of how is it affecting the community? How are you engaging with the community? Um, is it doesn't necessarily have to be like a performance-based experience, but is it open to the public? And yes, the website is, but like, is that going to score well in this evaluation? That's a question I would sort of be wondering about. Nicole, do you want to add anything?
No, I agree. I I see an opportunity to read the opportunity category in that way, especially if you say like, well, changing the website in this ways is going to increase access because of these metrics, this hard data, these things that I can demonstrate. Knowing what I know about the panelists who usually read this, I think it'd have to be a very persuasively told story. Again, because Kelly and I don't evaluate these ourselves, so we're giving like some advice, but at the end of the day, the people who sit down and score the applications
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we'd have to know more about the full scope of the project to determine if a website update is fundamentally appropriate for the grant too. So let's talk if that's something
Yeah.
you want to do.
Um, Another similar question about things that qualify.
Mhm.
Commit. Yeah, I think could see for something like to Robert's question about a choral group is celebrating the 50th anniversary during fiscal year 26 and will be commissioning the composition of a special piece for final concert of the year. Would this be eligible for a project support grant? Especially if the individual being commissioned um, or presents as sort of out of the opportunity, usual out of the opportunity, out of the reach. This wouldn't be like, oh, this is someone that without this we could almost never collab. There'd be no hope of collaborating
Yeah.
with them or something like that.
I mean, that's one of those that I actually, my first instinct was that that was a partnership with an individual artist, but it could
Mm,
also be an opportunity. So as we were talking
opportunity.
about earlier, a lot of these fit into different categories. It just is maybe when you read the two questions for those categories and when you read the criteria, think about what's going to fit best in the narrative that you're telling.
Yeah, because right now
Um,
what I have displayed is page 6, which describes the 4 subcategories. But again,
yeah,
jumping down to page 8 of the evaluation criteria, this category specific questions and the subcategories, you get to see how basically how you would answer that question in the
yeah.
application using these. So if you're thinking like if partnerships with individual artists and your pen starts jumping on the page, you're like, this is easy to answer, and then opportunity feels a little weirder. I don't know, like follow your instincts for how you're persuasively telling your story.
So one piece I want to highlight with Robert Bell's question about is the commission eligible? Potentially, yes. I think it does have to include, as you did in your sentence, it does have to include this piece is like being performed at within the grant period as part of the grant as well.
Yeah,
And
that
that
public
really
element.
speaks to the public element. Yeah. And then there was another question, do grant scores get posted for organizations to review? And if so, where can they be reviewed? No, the score does not get published. Um, that's because the score
The score
is
alone is not
all,
a
yeah,
yeah.
it's a very small part of the story. Um, so as an applicant, you may, as Nicole mentioned earlier, listen to the review webinar. And of course, if you, the grant contact or primary grant writer, can attend, you can send someone else from your organization to attend and listen. Once the grant is awarded, we provide every applicant with written feedback that includes what the panel both shared in that conversation and some of the comments they made in their own review. And then we are always able to have an individual conversation about it. We do not share a recording of the webinar at this time. Let's see, we got a couple more coming in. All right. Another commission question about a 2-year process. Um, Susan, it might be good for us to talk individually, but essentially, you can only,
Narratively, yes. Financially, no.
yeah, so I think that's a good answer, Nicole. You can include the finances that you've already paid outside of this before this grant period started, but you could absolutely talk about that in the narrative that X, Y, and Z steps have already taken place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because this grant can't be used for pre-grant costs. So
Yeah.
anything that's been paid before the grant period would begin of July 1st, 2025 is not
Mhm.
eligible. But in your narrative describing the project, you would want to say what you've completed already, and that may even go so far as to describe some of the fiscal as well as creative elements.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay. And then Stephen had another
Steven.
question for partnerships. No, it does not have to be.
It doesn't have to be, but
a Fairfax County-based partnership. Um, there are places in the criteria where it does emphasize like the impact on Fairfax County. So I think if you have a Fairfax County partnership, that could potentially be, scored or evaluated higher. But it is not a direct criteria and it is not a direct requirement that you have a partnership with a Fairfax County-based collaborator.
yeah, in the partnerships category specific, one of the criteria asks is if the project prioritizes Fairfax artists, artist cooperatives, or non-501c3 groups. But that's just in that subcategory of that category specific question.
There you go. Thank you. Wade said, does an applicant get feedback if they're not awarded a grant? That's a great question too. It sounded like you only give feedback to those who are awarded a grant. I did not mean for it to sound that way. Everybody will receive feedback whether or not you are awarded a grant. So thanks for
Yeah,
asking.
if you reach if your project application is complete and eligible, if you make it to the panel review process, even if you are not awarded, you will still have the opportunity to listen to the panel's discussion and then receive the feedback that comes from that. Madeline's
Oh,
asking, what
that
are elements or characteristics of successful applications regarding project evaluation methods? This is a good question. What are panels looking for?
Oh man, what are panelists looking for? It should always be relevant to the criteria. Like we should always be going back to the evaluation criteria to answer that question. Um, and where that hits in the I've been so buried in operating support evaluation
Yeah.
criteria that my brain hasn't
Well, and
thought
I
about.
think Madeline's question is about how the organization evaluates its project success.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so panelists like data, but they also like to see what you're doing with the data. It's really important, I think, say to collect, maybe you collect audience demographic data, but then panelists are also interested to see that you do something with that data. We took in audience demographic data. How did it help us understand or respond to community need?
Yeah. And I
Um,
mean, I think there are a couple of specific criteria that are talking about the
Evaluation.
organization's evaluation. So it comes up in the feasibility of project. Does the applicant describe how they intend to evaluate the impact on their community? And then it also comes up in community engagement about how are they involving community members and volunteers in that evaluation process. So those are the ways that the panel should be looking at evaluation. Um, what makes it good? I think Nicole, you hit on something nice. People do like data, but since we're talking about a project that hasn't happened yet, and sometimes you've done a pilot and you have that data, that's a great thing to like start with. Um, I think I think if you can speak to those two lines on the criteria, that's gonna put you in a really good place. Because if when you go with something as simple as like, oh, we do a survey afterward, the question is always, what are you doing with that survey? Like, did you get a good response rate? If you didn't, why? Or like that next step is usually what the panel is looking for.
Yeah, things that you would make an application strong. If you already have maybe a draft of the survey, what are some of the questions that you're asking? And then, how is that shared internally? Or what is the
Yeah,
plan to share a report on it internally? And then, yeah, to further ask questions like, what is the response rate? So how well does that data represent the program? And then you obviously don't know what the results are going to be, but if you have sort of rough plans for taking on, well, how do we do the survey again to increase response rate? Or we got good data this time, how are we planning to take action on it?
yeah,
It goes to a committee, it goes to a board. Transparency about, and also transparency about how the community is involved in that. Um, do they get to hear the
yeah.
results of the survey? what different vectors do they have to provide feedback, anonymous, in person, things like that.
Mhm.
So there isn't necessarily one way that the panelists are like, ah, yes, rubber stamp, excellent. That's all I need to see. It's
So
really
true.
about how effective it is to a way to communicate with the people you're trying to reach with the project. And why you think it's the most effective way. The surveys are not great with the 5-year-old crowd, for example. They're going to inconsistent response rate. So there may be other ways of evaluating that a project is successful if you're working with an age group that audience survey is not a good way to communicate with them.
I did get one more direct question I do want to address because I think it's important. And the question was, what is the source of funding for ArtsFairfax Project Support Grants? This is coming from the frame of, is any of this funding coming from the NEA that potentially could be clawed back? Fairfax County is the source of the funding for this grant program. We do not re-grant any NEA money. So if you're cautious about what the changes have been at the NEA or cautious about that funding going away, that is not this pool of money that we're working with here. So our money all comes from for that we re-grant all comes from Fairfax County government. Um, we have a pool of $150,000 for night. It's either 150 or $160,000. I should have looked that up ahead of time. To grant for
I'm
project
also too
support
stuck in operating
in
support right now.
FY25. Yeah. Yeah, we just got out of the panel from the other one. So we do have, it's basically the same pool we had last year of funding available. And I believe Fairfax County has already approved that budget, so we don't anticipate any change to the funding pool at this time. So thanks, that was a good question. And we've gotten a lot of questions about, are we re-granting NEA? If you hear from more people wondering, like, please let them know they can talk to us about it. And
Mhm.
no, we are not re-granting NEA funds. All right. And then Wade said, is the internal application scoring system available for applicants to see? I mean, the page that Nicole has is basically as much information as there
That's what
is.
the panelists are looking at, that the 5 core criteria are scored on a scale of 1 to 6, 1 being low and 6 being high.
Yeah.
And then each of the 3 priority elements provide an additional point to that score. But yeah, this is the exact scoring system that the panelists are using.
They just check a box for 1 through
Yeah.
6.
And write comments that
Yes.
we hope are illuminating.
Well, we are coming to the end of our information here. Nicole, I can put our final slide up
Oh,
if
please
you
do. Yes.
like, yeah.
I'm never going to
Um,
miss an opportunity to plug the new website. This is like
no,
Arts
we really
Fairfax
do.
Christmas.
Yeah, we really do. Am I sharing the right screen? I think. We really do hope the website is dividing this information in a way that makes it really accessible for you to find when you're doing the application, and it's organized. It's a lot of information, no matter how I slice it up. It's a lot. So again, hopefully you can find things easily and it's straightforward and you don't feel like you're lost in grant lingo because that's real, even for me. And if you can't find something, just call us. Please call us. We'll help you find it. And we like talking to people. Nicole, do you want to add anything about the last couple?
Highly recommend. And I got a couple questions, a lot of my like sort of side questions early on were individual artists who were like, where's my opportunity? Currently, we don't offer dedicated grants for individual artists, but highly recommend signing up for our newsletters where we share not only things to do, should you, an arts administrator, have some random free weekend in your life and you're like, boy, this could use an event. Check out our calendar to see what else is going on in the county, to see all those awesome events, but also the opportunities newsletter which offers things like job listings, so things that you could post if you have an opening, but also if you're looking for work. Artist calls for my individual artists who are looking for different opportunities and things like that. We also do have a Google Calendar. If you're someone like me who, when you open up your Google Calendar, it's a terrifying rainbow of overlapping blocks. You can add one, and it's the grant application deadlines, when the applications open, when events like our information sessions are happening, and also it'll tag a little date reminder for your grant deadline in there. A lot of these resources are available on the new website, so sign up for the newsletters, get your events up on the Arts Fairfax calendar, and then sign up for a Google Calendar so you can get those internal grant reminders too. That's my plug.
Good luck. So I think that's all we have for you today. If you have other questions, hang on, we'll keep chatting. We certainly have some more time. You can unmute, continue in the chat. We thank you all for joining us very much. And again, strongly encourage, especially if you haven't applied to Arts Fairfax before, give us a ring. Let's chat. Let's
Or
get
if it's your first
started.
time
And
applying for this, maybe you're a, operating
yes,
support expert, but you're curious about how to answer these different questions, the way this grant program differs from operating support. We love a specialty question. Or if
yeah,
you've got a unique case situation, like some of the people in the chat, we're here to talk it out.
yes, yeah. Thanks.
I love
Have a
seeing
great.
fans of the website in the chat.
We obviously are fans. Yeah. Thank you all. This is great to see new and familiar faces.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. Steve and I also like the employment section of the newsletter. That's how I found this job.
Nice.
Arts Fairfax posted their own grants position. I was like,
I mean, we had better.